Hello, Garland Nixon here with Jerry Kuzmarov. He is the editor of Covert Action Magazine. They do all kinds of spy stuff. I don't know if you've gone to Covert Action Magazine. I'm going to show you the website in a second, but it's fantastic. We're going to talk about Joe Biden's legacy. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with Jeremy. Let me tell you, let me real quick show you before we go any further. A lot of people may not be familiar with Covert Action Magazine. Let me bring it up here. It's great. Particularly, you'll probably something you'll like about it is this. If you haven't been there, they do a lot of spy stuff. They do a lot of stuff about the CIA. Look at some of these articles here. Canada and Ukraine, the suppression of a shameful history. We can go on and on. Jimmy Carter, mass incarceration. The media's real agenda on the alleged ISIS attack. Scandinavians, the world's happiest people, love killing the USA. So there's a lot of good stuff. You can see this. Peace activist, Einstein opposed Zionist. See what I mean? There's a lot going on here. It's an outstanding media outlet, and as I said, they do a lot of stuff on a lot of spy stuff, and that's what I enjoy. A lot of CIA stuff, a lot of stuff on covert action. So, Jeremy, let's start with this. This is an outstanding article, and it was written by Jeremy. I can never find it again. I am not doing real well. I just had the darn thing. I'm telling you what. Give me a second. So Jeremy wrote an article, and the article is Joe Biden gets a big fat F. There we go. Okay, here's the article. Boom. Joe Biden gets a big fat F for his foreign policy. Complicit in the Israeli genocide in Gaza, Biden sowed misery and death in Russia and Ukraine, expanded an already ridiculously high military budget, and put the world at risk of nuclear war. Jeremy, let's talk about your reasoning in grading Joe Biden an F.
Well, I think this is a lot of people. I mean, seen in the last election that people just didn't show up. Traditional Democratic Party voters just didn't show up because I think they really don't like the direction of the party, took under Biden. I mean, it really is a continuity from Obama and in many ways Bill Clinton. Biden represent the neoliberal corporate wing of the party. He'd been a war hawk throughout his career. I mean, he started in the early 70s. When he first came in the Senate, he packaged himself as an anti-war candidate, although he had mocked anti-war protesters when he was a law student at Syracuse. And then he shifted pretty quickly into the neocon camp. And when he became head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, he used that position to secure Senate support for the Iraq War. He had been a gung-ho hawk on the Bosnian conflict and the bombing of Serbia and Kosovo. Always a staunch supporter of aid to Israel. So it's kind of predictable, the policy that he pursued. And in the Obama administration, he was known as a hawk on Ukraine, and he had been pushing for sending anti-Javelin tank missiles at a time when officially the U.S. government was only providing non-lethal military aid to Ukraine. So, it's not surprising when he became the president, he really provoked a war with Russia to full hilt. I mean, he armed that regime to the hilt, and we've seen the billion and billion of dollars that have gone into the Ukrainian government, which is a highly repressive government that banned 12 opposition party, that even assassinates dissidents, and that provoked a deadly war with Russia that has killed who knows how many. And I mean, the exploits in the Middle East have been well documented. How much money, I'm sure you've discussed on this show, how many billions of dollars have gone in to arm the Israelis as they've killed. I mean, according to the Lancet report, the death toll is well upwards of 100,000 in Gaza, and they basically just flattened Gaza and made the whole place uninhabitable. So, I mean, how do you judge that? I mean, by a court of law or by a court of God? I mean, he's guilty of horrific war crimes. And how did this benefit the American public? You have wildfires now, a horrible situation in Los Angeles, and they were cutting the budget for the firefighters. That just epitomizes the bankruptcy of a foreign policy when you're spending billions in weapons and to provoke conflicts abroad, and you're not taking care of the American populace. So to me, that's a failed administration, and it builds off the heels of previous administrations. Unfortunately, we really need social movements and a new direction in our government.
Yeah, one of the things I was talking with a friend who diehard Democrat, and he started telling me about Trump as a liar, liar. I said, wait a minute, you're supporting Joe Biden. Trump's going to take a long time you know what I mean? If you know Joe Biden's history, he's had to drop out of running for presidential races because of plagiarism. He's literally lied about everything. There's video after video about Joe saying that he graduated at the top of his class and all of these things that he says that these accomplishments in college. And then you can find other videos of, I think one of them might be Mike Wallace, but people on the news reviewing all of Joe Biden's claims, and every one of them was false. And it was just so blatantly obvious. Joe Biden just made things up about his history with intent to lie and lied about them. And then when it was easily researchable, people found out, then he would never apologize or say, I was wrong. He'd just do it again, whatever. But yet his supporters would say, we're opposed to Trump because he lies. Your thoughts on that, Jeremy?
Well, yeah, I think unfortunately some people fall into the trap of partisan politics, and what we really have is a uniparty, corruption in both parties, and some of the worst people rise to the top in either of those parties. And so, I mean, your friend is probably right about a lot of what he says about Trump, but yeah, he's blind about Biden. And Biden's record is horrible throughout his career. I mean, you can look at his role as an architect of the modern day war on drugs and the terrible consequences of that policy in fueling mass incarceration and human rights abuses and what Michelle Alexander called New Jim Crow. And then his own son was deep into drugs and prostitution, and he lied about that. I mean, he claimed he didn't know about some of his son's nefarious business dealings. He lied about Ukraine, where he blackmailed the Ukrainian government to back off prosecution of his son's company. And my suspicion is that was actually a CIA front operation, because not only did they appoint Hunter Biden to the board of this Ukrainian natural gas company, they also appointed Covert Black, who had been the number 3 man in the CIA. And once you're CIA, always CIA. And they were using it to funnel arm to the Azov and other militias, because after 2014, the Ukrainian youth didn't want to fight their own people in eastern Ukraine. They had trouble with recruitment as they're having now, so they had to develop these militias that were privately financed. And that company was in the hand of Ihor Kolomoisky, a warlord who was a key financier for these militias that went to fight in eastern Ukraine. So anyway, I mean, he's a cover-up artist. And yeah, if you study his career, because I did a 5-part series that looked at Biden's history in Congress, and he has a horrible track record of supporting some of the worst possible policies. And yeah, as you point out, constantly lying. So yeah, I think people have to get past this partisan. I think the power elite wants us to be, fighting each other on partisan lines and hate your neighbor because he's a Republican. If you're a Democrat, or if you support abortion rights, you're supposed to hate him. But I mean, really, it's a uniparty. It's an oligarchy, and that's what leads to these terrible leaders. And that's why we need people to come together to transcend these partisan divisions. And personally, I feel we need new parties. I advocate for new third parties that would develop a progressive platform outside the 2 mainstream parties, which to me are both failures, because I would give Trump first presidency a failing grade, as well as Obama, because they're spending billion and billion on military and neglecting the social needs in our population. We have teachers who are grossly underpaid, who do great work every day. And to me, that's a great outrage. And we should be investing in education. We have young people who are facing debt, just for huge debt, just for pursuing their education. The cost of higher education is skyrocketed. We don't have a proper healthcare system. The richest country in the world should provide free healthcare to all its citizens. So, to me, we need a party, of people to come together along these lines to really push for investment in development of the American economy, and a government that will work for the American people, and cut that military budget in half, and cut funding for the CIA, which carries out rogue operation. The CIA misleads the public. They set up the National Endowment for Democracy, which just promotes propaganda to deceive us, to think that Russia is this threat that interfered in our election and we have to go after them, when really they've been spreading misinformation for over 10 years about that. And that's just one example.
Let me ask you this, because it's interesting that you mentioned Hunter Biden as kind of like a CIA front. I wouldn't even call him an operative, because he's probably too high to really be of a value to him from a perspective of operative, but as a front that they work through. Because I first really suspected that when I started seeing some investigations into these, whatever they were, these, they called them bio research labs. And I found out that Hunter Biden was involved in one of the companies that was funneling money to them. And I'm like, well, that's clearly CIA, that's clearly intelligence stuff, but why would they funnel it through him? In my experience in investigating intelligence is, they will maybe set up a bank, right? And they'll use that bank. They'll set up something, a CIA front thing, and they'll use that regularly to funnel whatever. They don't use them one time. So at that point, I'm like, well, if it's clear that he's involved in money transfers and funneling money for these research labs, God knows, I'm horrified to think what they're doing with them. We've heard some allegations and assertions by the Russians based on their investigations. All that has yet to be proven. But if Hunter Biden is involved in that, then he is a channel that they use, and they ain't going to just use him one time. Your thoughts on that, Jeremy?
I would agree with you. Yeah, I think he's involved in the financial end, and the CIA, sets up these very sophisticated financial networks, and supports or cultivates assets in high finance, so they can finance a lot of these kind of venture that you're describing. So I think you're right on about that. And yeah, we need more investigative journalists to try and probe into that and those kind of connections. But it shows, the CIA, because Covert Action magazine was founded by Philip Agee, who's a CIA whistleblower, and that was one of his core insights, is that the CIA did a lot of the dirty work of financial oligarchy in the United States. And Hunter Biden is a good way to see that, because he's part of that oligarchy, and he's part of these elite, high-powered financial firm that are providing the seed money for various CIA operations and ventures.
Let me ask you this, since we're on this, before we get back, and I guess it's all part of it. I used to do a show in LA, KPFK, and that didn't work out well. At some point Hollywood didn't like the things that I was saying, because I'm not a partisan guy and I'm opposed to corruption, etc. And they got a very defined position there. Crap, I forgot where I was going. It'll come back to me in a second. I got myself distracted. I'm an ADD person, so that happens normally. It was something about the CIA funding. But at any rate, let's continue on. And when it comes back,
and one point you can look at, people can look up In-Q-Tel. They set up venture capital fund like In-Q-Tel to fund these kind of operations. And I think it was Meta Biota that Hunter Biden, he was connected. I'd have to double check all the names of the firms, but yeah.
He was. I know what I was going to say. When this fire thing, so, when I was there, one of the things that I brought up was Karen Bass, the Los Angeles mayor, she was vice chair of the board for the National Endowment for Democracy. And I was on the air talking about that, saying, hey, you got a mayor here who basically is a regime change operative for, the international, imperial regime change machine. And now we find out that she's in Ghana. What the hell is the Los Angeles mayor doing in Ghana at the time that her place is burning down? And as you said, hey, she's not a former National Endowment for Democracy's person, but so I just thought and she comes back. Has cut the budget. She's fired. She's done everything bad that you would expect from that kind of a person. Your thoughts on the mayor of LA being a regime change operative? And I think that because of the importance of LA, because of the importance of the film industry and the media there, that would be a prime place where they would want to have a mayor who is an intelligence operative. What do you think about that assertion?
Yeah, that's a good observation. Yeah, because the NED has functioned as a front for CIA covert operations abroad, and the CIA is prohibited from operating in the United States, but they have ways of getting around those laws. So this would be a good way if they cultivate this mayor, and then they can use her to carry out, and they may be using the same kind of dirty tricks that they use in foreign countries. And that includes dividing the population, to kind of divide and conquer strategy, and pitting stirring up like race war, racial unrest. That's something they've done in foreign countries when they want to facilitate a coup or just destabilize the country or weaken social movements. And that may be a key, target, I think, within the United States, is to weaken the unity of social movements, to divide people, whether it's along race or partisan. That's why they play up this hyper partisanship, because they don't want working and middle class Americans coming together against the financial oligarchy. And that's one reason they were behind we're coming up on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Martin Luther King Jr., that's what he was doing before he was assassinated, was building a broad interracial coalition to push for more socialist policies. He was criticizing U.S. foreign policy, and that's why he was such a threat to the establishment. And some astute people said, well, when he was just fighting for blacks getting a cup of coffee at a diner, that was okay. They could allow that, but when he was starting to really challenge the power that be in the financial system and bringing people together. So if they're involved in covert operations, maybe using somebody like Bass, and there have been allegations about Obama too, that he was an infiltrator in the black community, and that his job was to try and stir up these divisions, because that's what they don't want. An interracial movement, what King was building, that would really facilitate real change in America. So, but I mean, there are other dirty tricks, like, as you say, with Hollywood. Hollywood is a key propaganda organ. And I had an article about this, because the CIA's image was very low in the 70s. And there was even some films coming out that were showing some of the dirty work they were doing. And this was in the AG era. So the CIA got smart. They developed an office where they forged a liaison with Hollywood directors, and they began to basically control what was produced in Hollywood about the CIA. And gradually they made, changed the public image into something more heroic.
Well, Jimmy Dore had a piece that he did. I don't know if you're familiar with it. And in it, he showed it was the Covert show. And there was a woman on there who was, I don't know, she was some kind of an actress. I don't keep up with that stuff today. But she was saying, oh, yes, there was a camp. And she called it a spy camp. And she said the CIA intelligence, they have a 1-week camp. And she says, where they bring in people from the media and actresses and this and that and actors, and then they, teach them about what they do for a weekend. And I forgot the name of her. It's Jimmy Dore of her show. It was one of the big ones. And she said, yes, our head writer is former CIA. And his father was in the CIA, former, and his father was in the CIA. And so now what I get from that is, so we've got, and it was one of these, West Wing kind of shows about politics, right? So now I'm like, so Hollywood has a show about politics, and their head writer is former CIA, and his father was CIA. And every week, every year, the actors go to some CIA camp for a week to learn what the CIA does. And I'm like, and in the middle of that, she started rattling on, and Covert cut her like, yeah. Don't tell me, nice hair you got there. You know what I mean?
Cut the conversation pretty quickly.
Yeah, he did. Yeah. That didn't work out.
Yeah, because they would take him off the air if he. Look what happened to Tucker Carlson. They took him off pretty quickly once he started talking about the CIA's role in the JFK assassination. But yeah, and on that, in the article, when I was doing some research on that topic, I found that Ben Affleck, there was a spy show with Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner. I forget what it was called. Actually, Alias. I used to watch it a few times. And that was heavily supported by the CIA. And Affleck, they even gave him a tour of the CIA. And like they showed them, and some CIA agents like took him under his wing to kind of help prepare him for that role. So, and I think another show was the show Homeland that was very popular. Obama called it his favorite show about this army officer who had been in captive and then came back, and it spotlighted some CIA agents. That show also, I think, was sponsored by the CIA. So, yeah, these are known examples.
Well, there was, I mean, here's an example. I remember watching the latest like Jurassic Park movie, right? And in that movie, there was this corporation, and this corporation in this movie was doing bad things. It was like a Monsanto or something. It's going to take over all the farming. It was doing evil things, right? Now, a diverse group of young CIA agents infiltrated this corporation to stop them from doing evil things to the worldwide food, whatever, right? And I'm like, so my understanding from this is the CIA's job, of course, a diverse young group of CIA agents, attractive and smart, goodly people, a diverse group of CIA agents are actually going to stop a corporation from doing evil things.
It's the exact inverse. I mean, Philip Agee wrote about how corporations, again, like CIA, were the arm of the financial oligarchy, and they did the dirty work to open up foreign countries for corporation to exploit the natural resources and dominate their economy. So it's the exact inverse of reality, but that is often the case nowadays. So.
Yes. So let's continue. Here we go. Now we're gonna watch this. Let me find it. You're gonna love this. You're going to love this. Let me give you some of this. This is okay. We're going to watch a little bit of Jimmy Dore, and everybody, I like Jimmy Dore.
I love Jimmy Dore.
Yeah, he does a lot of good work. I know you've been on there before, haven't you?
I've been interviewed him by Art when he was on RT.
Mm-hmm. So let's listen to a little bit of
allying itself.
Hold on.
Yeah, she's probably punished hard.
Watch his body language.
Here we go.
Usually they're
How long ago did you start shooting this season?
How?
First time.
It's one of our
Thing that they've told you about.
spooks. Yeah.
Is it like
and was also it's like
Yes.
Was.
You remember when Jon Stewart said that?
Ixnay.
But it's changed. When Trump's president.
Oh, not the client. It's not.
usually they're
How long
not
ago did
such
you start
good
shooting
friends.
this season?
So, well, the key about that was she blabbered on, and all of a sudden she started telling too much, talking too much, and Covert was like, you know what I mean? Like, we got to stop.
Yeah.
Now listen to that. We've got an actress saying, yes, our lead writer, his father was in the CIA, his cousin was in the CIA, he retired from the CIA all over the place. Oh, they take us to DC, and she says, yes, you know, and this has been going on. No, this year, it goes on every year, of course. And we go to Georgetown and we hang out with spies and the State Department. This is Hollywood. This, my friend, is like an admission. And finally, Covert, somebody probably in his ear, like, Ixnay with the
Yeah. The network's not going to like this.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to get some calls from State Department and the White House to say they're not supposed to know. Shh.
Yeah. That's amazing. Thanks for pointing that out to me. Yeah, that clip. I mean, I knew that show. I'd heard about that show, Homeland, being influenced by the CIA, but this really underscores that. And yeah, the mention of journalists, because I mean, the entire journalist profession had been corrupted. And so much of what we read in the daily papers is CIA disinformation, unfortunately.
Well, let me ask you this. Again, giving Joe Biden an F, one of the things that I think is interesting is this whole censorship thing. Because you have people saying, well, they've got to keep us safe and they've got to stop misinformation. And I'm like, you actually believe that the U.S. government, the people have lied to you about every war, have lied to you about everything, that they are concerned about the truth? What do you think about your grade on and discussion on censorship under the Biden administration, and also, you know, the whole thing of it, the Twitter files, what we found out about the White House asking for censorship, this whole intelligence, this incestuous relationship, that's the way I'll put it, between intelligence, the media, and Hollywood, and social media, and all of that comes down, you know, ends up in this form of mass censorship.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's unfortunate that a lot of people are really naive and gullible, and they believe something that is ridiculous, and some of it is, yeah, that they're not. I think the education system has failed to properly educate people, so they don't really have that knowledge that you or I have about the horrible track record of the CIA. You know, it's not taught in school. It's not out in the center in the media. So, you know, people who are not, you know, reading books or doing, you know, investigation, their own research, don't know much about this. So they are easily manipulated. And yeah, the Biden record was terrible, as you point out. I mean, and yeah, we've seen, I think, in the last 10 years, I mean, this Russophobia and this anti-Russia campaign. Because I published a book in 2018, The Russians Are Coming Again. It looked, you know, it warned about it looked at the history of the first Cold War and how we're just repeating the same dangerous patterns. And this was before the Ukraine conflict, but it kind of warned that this is leading in a very, very, very dangerous direction. And yeah, so this Russophobia, and the Biden administration just took it to the next level. And I mean, there has been a kind of de facto censorship. You know, any critical voice about U.S. policy regarding Russia or any dissenting viewpoint has been completely suppressed in any mainstream media outlet. But yeah, Biden really had a horrible track record. And I mean, the COVID issue as well, there was no debate at all. And they were attacking doctors, you know, either censoring them, some lost their medical license. And that's, you know, there has to be a debate. I mean, so, and then, you know, it showed the hypocrisy, because the Biden rhetoric was, oh, we're on this crusade for democracy against authoritarianism. And yet they're introducing more and more authoritarian methods here within the United States, let alone support, like the article goes into, all the authoritarian governments, I mean, including Ukraine, which is an authoritarian government that canceled elections, barred 12 opposition parties. And then you can look, I mean, at Biden's support for Saudi Arabia or Uganda or Rwanda, you know, or, you know, skullduggery in Pakistan, where they had Imran Khan arrested, and they support a dictatorship in Pakistan, you know, cozying up to Modi in India. So it goes on and on. You know, in South America, the Biden administration allied with the Nayib Bukele, this leader in El Salvador, right-wing leader, who enacted this draconian war on gangs, where he basically just like arrested everybody. And I was talking the other day, I met somebody who was in El Salvador, and we were just discussing it. He said exactly what I'm saying, and he's not a very political guy, but he's like, yeah, they just took everybody off the street. If your cousin, you may have had a cousin who was suspected of being in a gang, they arrested you. Guilt by association, and their prisons are just teeming, like massive overflowing of prisons. And Amnesty has carried out some reports, the horrible prison conditions. And the leader said, I don't care if they're innocent. They're going to jail. Our streets are safe now. And this is the kind of government Biden has supported. And meanwhile, he attacked the government in Venezuela that the Carter administration said had the fairest elections in the world. So this alleged war for democracy on autocracy is absolutely ridiculous, including the situation here in the United States.
What's interesting? Have you been speaking of their foreign policy? I don't know if you've been following South Korea.
Yes, I have. Yes, there's another good example. He declared martial law, and that was they said he was the perfect partner of the Biden administration because he was a hardline neoconservative who's going to take us to war against North Korea and allows for the U.S. returning military nuclear weapons, stationing them in South Korea. He was giving the green light for that and ramping up U.S. militarism in South Korea. So he was Biden's perfect partner, even though, he's restoring the authoritarian practices of South Korea's military dictatorship, which the U.S. supported for many years during the Korean War and after, until there had been an organic pro-democracy movement in South Korea. It's a myth that the U.S. ever supported democracy in South Korea. They supported a brutal dictatorship for decades. And the Korean War is one of the worst. I just reviewed a book on Korea by a former intelligence analyst named he writes under a pen name, A.B. Abrams. And in fact, the Nazis, that was their defense at Nuremberg. Some of them saying, well, the U.S. is doing what we did to North Korea. So if you prosecute us, you should prosecute them. I mean,
I would
agree.
What the
U.S. has done in Korea is just horrible.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but there are a lot of credible allegations that the U.S. used biological warfare during the Korean War.
Yes, that has been confirmed. In fact, we have an article forthcoming at Covert Action Magazine, and I published, it's a review of a book by Thomas Powell, whose father had been the editor of a China monthly magazine that had investigated this during the Korean War itself. And there's new evidence that fully validate that this occurred. In fact, the CIA itself unwittingly declassified some documents that were incriminating and provided definitive proof that this germ warfare was carried out. Previously, there had been a lot of evidence, including confessions of pilots, although they claim that those pilots had been brainwashed. But if you read that by the Chinese in interrogation, but that was just a way to cover it up, because if you read the transcripts, like they recounted in very precise detail what they were doing, that only somebody who actually, carried it out. And a lot of the details, historians analyzed it. There's a book about that came out. Yeah, I followed this topic very closely. There had been a book published by Dave Chaddock about 5 years ago that really analyzed those pilot testimonials and said they had to be accurate, and he was able to match a lot of the information they said. Now we have this new book. It just came out by Thomas Powell, and he discusses these CIA documents that they released unwittingly, and he thinks it was like a younger person who didn't realize, because I think the documents discussed a public health campaign by the North Koreans, and it was like describing this public health campaign about how they were trying to deal with the germ warfare. And she may have missed the context because she was younger, because for years the agency tried to cover this up. It was dismissed as a conspiracy theory. Although there had been an investigation beside the pilot confessionals. Joseph Needham was a very distinguished British scientist. They sent him and a delegation to study this during the Korean War, and he produced like a 100-page report that validated the charges of the North Korean and Chinese government back then. So already there had been strong evidence, but these CIA documents just further confirm that this actually happened. So, and then they murdered, Dr. Frank Olson threatened to be a whistleblower. He was intimately involved with those programs, working out of Fort Detrick in Maryland. He was a CIA scientist, and he went to Korea several times. And that's likely the motive, that he threatened to become a whistleblower, and that's when he got murdered. And they covered up his murder to make it look like a suicide. So, yeah, these are some of the dark secrets of the Cold War. And that's why, like, my book, The Russians Are Coming Again, it was like, looks at some of the dark history of the Cold War, including like the Korean War, and how they justified that, fighting the commies and all the horrible atrocities. And I was like, we shouldn't go down that again. But that's exactly what we're doing. So
let me ask you this. Let me show you a book that I introduced to a lot of people they hadn't heard of, but I've had it. And let me see if I can get it. There we go. Ally versus Ally, right? And it is America, Europe, and the Siberian Pipeline Crisis by Anthony Blinken. And he wrote this book in like 84. I believe 87, first published in 1987. Okay. Now, he wrote a book opposing pipelines between Russia, at that time the Soviet Union, and Europe. And in it, he discussed that the Europeans saw this as, and the Russians, as economics. Everybody makes money, everybody's economy looks good. But basically, the neocons saw it as geostrategic advantage. And that, he didn't like it. He opposed it. As you probably know, the CIA literally blew some Soviet pipelines back then, went in and blew some up back then. And then voila, they bring in Amos Hochstein, a name that will live in infamy as far as what's happening in Israel right now. They bring in Amos Hochstein, Biden does, and Amos Hochstein's job is to address the Nord Stream pipeline, and the Nord Stream pipeline was addressed. And I think that is something that will be a powerful legacy of Joe Biden's reign of horror, because the people in Germany are starting to talk about it more and more. And as Alexander McCoy said, this is a bomb with a long fuse. The time will come when the Europeans will be forced to say, they'll be forced to tell the truth. The Americans blew it, and it wiped out our economy. Your thoughts on this whole Nord Stream stuff? And might I add, Seymour Hersh wrote something on it, but I also think that there was something hidden in there, because there ain't no damn way that was done and that MI6 wasn't involved. Clearly, MI6 was involved. In fact, I don't know if you know this, at some point, the Russians, as I understand it, came out and said that they entered, apparently they had hacked into Liz Truss's phone. And when it was blown, she texted Blinken and said, as soon as the Nord Stream pipeline blew, she texted Blinken and said, it's done. So MI6, was at the right in the middle of it. In fact, it sounds to me like maybe this was leaked to Seymour Hersh from a particular perspective, so that, it's going to come out that it happened. So leak it to Seymour Hersh, but we'll leave MI6 out, so that the story doesn't include MI6, who might have been at the center of it. Anyway, your thoughts on the Nord Stream pipeline as a legacy of Joe Biden's administration and reign of horror?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's very interesting. Yeah, I'm going to look up the Blinken book, because it's interesting if there are historical parallels. And yeah, I think that was a strategy. It would make sense as an Anglo-Saxon strategy, to sever, because I think part of the motive underlying the war in Ukraine is to sever Russian ties with Germany, because that's perceived as a threat to Anglo-American world dominance. If Germany allies closely with Russia, then the two will be a powerhouse together and undercut Anglo-American dominance. So the Nord Stream pipeline was crucial to that strategy, along with the broader war strategy in Ukraine. And this was a major act of environmental terrorism, and it showed the gangster nature of the Biden administration. This is just something horrible. And how could you claim to be for the environment when you do something like that? But I think it also, could be a major turning point as far as Europeans, as you point out, turning away from the United States, and starting to realize that the United States doesn't have their best interests at play. And they're bitter dividing line now in German politics, and I think the tide is starting to shift, and the more pro-Russian elements, because it really is in Germany's advantage to have good trading relations with Russia. So this could be a turning point as far as geopolitics, and something that ultimately backfires. But as far as the gangsterism is just horrible, and those historical precedents are interesting. I'm going to look more into those precedents during the 80s.
Let me read just a couple sentences from Tony Blinken's book. They were talking about actions they could take to hurt the Soviets, but it might hurt our economy. It might hurt the West, it might hurt the European economy. And they were talking about these pipelines, how, we could stop the pipelines, or we could do more, things to address the issues that the neocons didn't like cheap Russian energy getting to Europe. Tony Blinken. For a number of influential policymakers, the time seemed opportune to engage the Soviet Union in a round of economic warfare, regardless of the price that might have to be paid by the economies of Western Europe and the American business community, which would be excluded from Soviet bloc markets. So Tony Blinken tells us back then, their discussion was, we got to act to hurt Russia. We don't care how it hurts, regardless of the price that might have to be paid by the economies of Western Europe and the American business community. And when Tony Blinken finally came to power, he did exactly what he wanted to do. And here's what it shows. He knew that he was hurting both us, our American business community, and the Western economies, period. And they made the decision back in the 80s that they would act, as he says, regardless of the price that might have to be paid by the economies of Western Europe. Now, what's interesting is this. When they say by the economies of Western Europe, they mean the working class. They don't mean the rich. They don't mean the billionaires. They're going to be okay no matter what. He's saying it doesn't matter if we have to screw the working class over of our own country throughout all of the West, as long as we hurt the Russians. Your thoughts on that?
Well, that's a very revealing passage for the mindset of the neoconservatives. And Blinken, he has this image as this kind of Boy Scout, all-American type, but it shows his dark nature there, that he really doesn't, and what class he serves. He doesn't care about the people who might be affected, and that show that these are the neocon, and similar to the mindset as Big New Brzezinski, and he sees the world as chessboard. And if you read Brzezinski, he actually says, the division of Korea is good because we don't want a strong Korea. And he doesn't care. Like families were separated in the Korean War, and like what I was describing, I mean, there had been a horrible human consequence of the division of the Koreas and the war that went on there and the current standoff. But a Brzezinski or a Blinken, they don't care about humanity, and they're just ideological zealots. And a lot of it even is they have this irrational hatred for Russia. I mean, Brzezinski was of the Polish nobility, a class in Poland was just virulently Russophobic and hates Russia. So they just want to, get even at Russia or gain revenge, and they don't care about the human cost. And that's what we see. And that's what, I point, like I'm doing a study now of Syria, and I quoted the Wall Street Journal, like they were, celebrating the fall of Assad, and they're like, now, Israel's been successful because this route to Hezbollah has been cut off, and Israel's position suddenly is stronger. And it's like, I was like, they don't care at all about the human life. Like, spinning Israeli policies of success when they've killed over 100,000 people, and when the Syrians have suffered unimaginable devastation during the 10 years of civil war and sanctions, and they're living in horrible poverty, and so many have died. And these neocons just don't care. They don't even discuss the human life that might be affected by these policies. So it's the same kind of thing here. They know that the European economy will be devastated. They know the environment will be devastated by blowing up pipelines, and they don't care. They think there's some strategic gain, which in some cases is questionable, because I think Europe in this case is actually slowly turning against the United States, and it may backfire. And Russia has been able to withstand the current policy. But if they can strike a blow on Russia, they're happy, even if millions die. And if they can enrich themselves, often there's some private gain for a private individual. Like with the destruction of Nord Stream, it helped natural gas producers in Texas and in parts of the United States because now they filled the market. So there's some financial advantage for some cronies of the government, and they don't care how many thousands or millions of lives are affected. And there's a similar calculation in Afghanistan. Brzezinski didn't care. He bragged about arming the Mujahideen to induce a Soviet invasion that tore up Afghanistan, destroyed millions of lives, plunged the country into a decade of warfare from which we never recovered. And similar in Ukraine, they've engineered this whole conflict in Ukraine that has destroyed millions of lives, and they don't care. So they're not human, these kind of people. And why do we have these people running our government? I mean, they have so much power and they don't care at all about other humans. We have to do something about that. We can't allow these kind of sociopaths to run our governments and cause the destruction that they do.
I've always felt, I refer to Tony Blinken as a spy, really, because for this reason. And this, there's often some lineage, there's some DNA, physical DNA running along these spy operations, right? My father, and in fact, the one actor says, well, this guy was a spy, his father was a spy, how that works. Family, okay. A lot of people don't know this. Ghislaine Maxwell, and I'm sure you do, Jeffrey Epstein's co-spy. Her father, Ghislaine Maxwell, was named Robert Maxwell. There was a book written about him, Robert Maxwell, Israeli super spy, right? And he was, the guy was a spy. Okay, let's face it. This is Ghislaine Maxwell's father. Tony Blinken often talks about his stepfather. His stepfather was Robert Maxwell's lawyer.
Oh.
Ghislaine Maxwell's father, his name was Samuel Pisar, P-I-S-A-R. Ghislaine Maxwell, Israeli spy. Her father, Israeli spy, had a lawyer, and his lawyer was Tony Blinken's stepfather. And when I see that lineage, it's like, yeah, guy's a spy. You work on spy stuff all the time. Does that make alarms go off in your head, Jerry Kuzmarov?
Absolutely, yeah. And I know his father, Donald Blinken, was a high-level State Department person, an ambassador who worked, I believe, in Russia. And he was involved in the Clinton era, in pushing these free market privatization initiatives.
What, in the 90s?
Yes.
In the 90s?
I mean, he had a long career, but I know he was stationed somewhere in Eastern Europe in the 90s, pushing this privatization, and was, shock therapy. And he may have worked in Russia. So there's always an interest in Russia, and an ardent anti-Russia, pro-capitalist point of view. Like right-wing capitalists, deregulate all of economy type thing. So that's in his lineage. And he definitely, of that class, that ruling class. And they seem to, have just a different mentality than the rest of us. And they're cut off from humanity. I don't know, maybe their wealth, they think they're better than everybody else. And they just don't care about the rest of humanity. They look down on other people, and they have this ideologically driven agenda. And Blinken would fit the bill as somebody for the spy. I mean, he has the looks. He has these kind of all-American looks. He has this kind of, on the surface, he looks like a honorable, Boy Scout type, innocent type person, which is kind of the image America wanted to cultivate. but there's a dark heart within him, and that was epitomized by that passage you read, and that's unfortunately true of the CIA and the foreign policy establishment more broadly. And of course, Kissinger said the CIA is not mission. Covert action is not missionary work. So I don't know. Some of them they kind of feel, they know they're doing dirty work, but they think it's for a higher purpose. But only they can see that purpose. Most others, if you look at it objectively, see the purpose really as evil.
Your thoughts on Joe Biden? I mean, he brought in Kurt Campbell, a guy who literally said that he wanted to unleash like a magnificent symphony of death, and literally said that, a magnificent symphony of death in Asia, right? Biden brings this in. Your thoughts on Joe Biden's history regarding China, Asia, etc.? I mean, as soon as Blinken came in, he goes to Alaska, insults the Chinese. I mean, but your thoughts on Joe Biden's legacies regarding the Asian Pacific region?
I think it's been terrible. He's expanded on it started really, the Obama administration had an abhorrent policy, the Asia pivot policy, and there should have been more backlash. I think too many people were deferential to Obama, caught in this partisan politics, so they weren't spotlighting some of the very dangerous things he was doing, including his pivot to Asia policy, which was a huge military buildup, building up the U.S. military bases, building up the U.S. naval presence to counter the rise of China. And I actually, because I did a book on Obama called Obama's Unending Wars, and I interviewed Charles Freeman, who was a diplomat who worked actually under Nixon as a translator, and he was with Nixon when Nixon went to China to open China. And he said, well, firstly, he said, look, and I quoted this in my book, Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, advocated for a win-win strategy of cooperation. And Freeman, said that, look, China is not a threat to the United States. The growth of China's economy actually represents an opportunity for American businesses to engage in more trade with China and to benefit. We should be, thinking of ways we can harness China's economic growth to our own. It doesn't have to be negative even for the American economy. But instead, there's this mindset that America has to be number one, and since China is becoming powerful economically, we have to contain or destroy them. And that was the mentality underlying this bankrupt pivot policy. And then Trump and Biden have just expanded that policy. And I did an article on how Biden was building up, and this was reported in the New York Times. Occasionally you get some good reporting in the New York Times, not on their op-ed pages, but in the newspaper. This was a good article about, maybe it wasn't that critical, but it was reporting on what was going on, how they're reviving old World War II era military bases in Pacific Island. The U.S. government is building them back up. And this is the only purpose would be to prepare for a new Pacific War. And they're investing huge amount of taxpayer money that should be spent on our teachers, our healthcare system, firefighters. Instead, they're rebuilding World War II era bases in remote Pacific Islands so they have a staging ground for attack on China. That's how the Biden administration is spending his money. And then there's the porcupine strategy for Taiwan, just to arm Taiwan to the teeth, supposedly as a deterrent to China. But they're also been supporting separatist elements in Taiwan, and that's evolved as a new flashpoint. I did another article on the Philippines, and Kamala Harris went there to shore up an expansion of the U.S. military base network in the Philippines. And they're closing up the Ferdinand, again, this bankruptcy of this claim that we're on this crusade for democracy against authoritarianism. But Harris had meetings, and the U.S. is giving more aid to Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the current leader of Philippines, who's the son of one of the worst Cold War dictators, and who's replicating the practices of his father by jailing opposition politicians and enacting more and more authoritarian standard in Philippines. So, and that's what I argued in my book. Clearly, in the first Cold War, the U.S. claim to be exporting democracy was completely undermined in the Cold War by its anti-communist and anti-Russia zeal, and supported some of the worst dictatorships. And we're starting to see a replication of that pattern in the new Cold War. So, Biden's approach has been totally wrong-headed, and that's why we need social movements to press for a complete transformation of U.S. foreign policy.
Yeah, I've seen a bunch of people in the chat say, and this is of course obvious, that they're getting no notifications. It's, they're coming on and they're like, hey, I didn't get notified. I got no. YouTube is so censored. I mean, I look at my YouTube analytics at times, and I'll have, like, on a given day, I may have, on a low day, 13. One day I had, this is YouTube. Let's see, 10. Where is it? Now tell me something's wrong with this picture. You get subscribers when people see your videos. So Monday, January 13th, right? I had 10,373 views on that day, right? And you know how many subscribers I got? I lost 16.
Oh,
10,300 views, which was a low day. I lost 16 subscribers over a 3-day period. I had like 30-some thousand views, and that was a low period. So I had 30-some thousand views, 17 subscribers. 17 out of 30-some thousand views. It ended up being like one subscriber for almost every 5,000 views. 60% of them were new viewers, but for some reason, none of them decided to subscribe. You know what I mean? When you start looking at the YouTube analytics, it's so obvious that you are so censored. One last question I want to ask you, your thoughts on it. It's something you ever looked in. I've heard a lot of suspicion about Obama's lineage, about his mom. And I've always thought it was kind of weird that at the same time that the United States had overthrown the government, of Indonesia, the book, The Jakarta Method, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And they put in a horrible what's his name? Was it
Suharto?
Suharto, yeah. Yeah, because it was spelled with a K, right? KH, right? Something like that.
Well, they overthrew Sukarno, who was a socialist, imposed Suharto, and he enacted a mass genocide targeting suspected communists and ethnic Chinese. And that's an example, horrific policies in the Cold War. We don't want to see
how many people? About how many people? Do you know how many people were approximately killed?
Officially over 1 million. It may be up to 2 or 3 million. And I was doing some research on the Clinton era policy toward Indonesia, and I was reviewing some documents, and it pointed to there were people still in prison in the 90s from that campaign in the mid-60s. They had been languishing as political prisoners. They had been suspected or may have been members of the Indonesian Communist Party, which was the largest communist party in Asia. And there were over 1 million killed, and there were tens of thousands forced to languish in prisons for decades as a result of that horrific policy. And the CIA celebrated, going back to that point, that they have no humanity. They're happy and saw it as a great victory for the West, and they didn't care that over 1 million people got killed instantaneously.
And I thought it was weird that Obama's mother, at that particular time, just happened to go to Indonesia and hang around there for a few years at the exact same time that the CIA is doing this gigantic operation. And I'm like, there's something fishy about it. And she who does that? You know what I mean? I have a mother. I'm around the same age as Obama within a few months. And my mom wasn't going to Indonesia. She was starting a business at that time and what have you. You know what I mean? Whose mother goes to damn Indonesia at the time, or any country? It would be like, yes, where's your mom? She's been in Syria for a couple of weeks, and I think she's going to leave there and go to Venezuela. Then, wait a minute. You know what I'm saying? Well, who's your mom? Karen Bass, for God's sake? Your thoughts on the suspicion?
Well, actually, I investigated that. I published a book called Obama's Unending Wars. And firstly, his grandfather, Stanley Armour Dunham, is suspected of being in the CIA or some intelligence agency. There's photos of him in Lebanon in the 1950s. He also ran an exchange with the university, and also he worked in different places. He claimed he was a furniture salesman, but actually the places he moved it was found that they are always near military bases and areas where they have intelligence people. And then he was coordinator of an exchange, and that's the CIA program is they'll bring promising leaders or students from developing world countries, including Africa or Asia, to study, and they're groomed. And the East-West Center in Hawaii is like the School of the Americas, and it's deeply connected to the intelligence agencies. So he was running an exchange at the East-West Center, which was either a State Department or CIA operation, and that's how Barack Obama Sr. And there's a photo of Stanley Armour smiling with Barack Obama Sr. And the whole group that was brought as part of the CIA State Department exchange. And this is after he allegedly impregnated his 18-year-old daughter. It's unlikely he would actually be smiling, and befriending a guy who impregnated an 18-year-old out of wedlock. And that's another can of worms that there's a possibility that somebody else was Obama's father. But with regard to his mother, his mother then studied at the East-West Center, and she studied Russian languages. So that would give the indication that she was recruited into the CIA or an intelligence agency, and she was pursuing a degree in anthropology. And then she was sent by the Ford. She was funded by the Ford Foundation, which is a CIA-connected philanthropy. Most of its directors came from the CIA. She was sent to Indonesia, to East Java province, which was a hotbed of the Indonesian Communist Party, to work on microfinance projects. Now, and that's right after the coup. So these microfinance projects, they were designed to tether villagers in that a region that was a communist hotbed by providing them loans, small loans, so they can start a business. It was a political program to try and tether them to the new Suharto regime and draw them away from the communists. And it is believed that she was part of an Operation Prosims, because she had the language skills and she was working on the ground, so that she would be the perfect person. And there were very few who had those skills and were doing that work, that she would get information on their political affiliations and send it to officials in the government. And also, she happened to be married to Lolo Soetoro, who was the liaison between the Suharto military and the oil companies in Indonesia, and was a high-level Indonesian military officer. And people who knew Ann Dunham said that this was not a real marriage, that had been an arranged marriage, like a political alliance to get him a visa and to legitimize her going to Indonesia. So everything looks like she's an intelligence operative. I mean, we don't have documents saying she was in the CIA, but everything looks like it. And even if she wasn't, she was working with CIA-connected agency with microfinance, which was a political program to get these villagers to ally with the Suharto government. And Obama lied about this in his memoirs. He claimed his mother didn't know what was about the violence in Indonesia when this was reported in the newspapers, and he just lied about the circumstance of her going over there. So that's suspicious too. And then it's believed that Obama was in Afghanistan and Pakistan in the late, right around the time of the Mujahideen with Lolo Soetoro, because she also then went to work in Pakistan for Ford Foundation and these agencies. And so, as you say, a young guy, because there's a year where Obama wasn't a student at Columbia. Before he finished his degree, he had a year traveling in Pakistan. So who goes to Pakistan when the CIA is running these operations to train the Mujahideen in Pakistan? And he went there with her, his stepfather, who is very high level Indonesian military and likely intelligence. And then Obama worked for a CIA company. He plays up his community. He was a community organizer, and even that he worked for a big foundation. But right after he graduated Columbia, he went to work for Business Risks, which is a CIA company that provides assessments of foreign countries for their investment climate. He worked there for at least a year. So he's pretty directly connected to the CIA and his family. And then when he was president, he gave Leon Panetta said, Obama gave us everything we wanted when he was the president.
Well, and supposedly, allegedly, they say he was discovered by one of his professors who happened to be Zbigniew Brzezinski. Let me add that one other thing. When Obama was running for Senate, and this stinks of high heaven. The scent of CIA is everywhere. And you're probably familiar with this. So when he decided to run for Senate, he was running against a sitting senator. He was just a senator in Illinois. So he's running for Senate of the U.S. against the sitting senator. And suddenly the senator got caught up in a sex scandal.
Yeah.
And had to drop out. And they sent this guy to run against him, a guy who I used to know from a black guy. I forgot his name, crazy as hell, guy from Maryland, right? And I used to be at a radio station with this guy. It was a conservative radio station. And you know me, I'm not conservative, but I was there as kind of like an opposition. I argued with him and fussed with him and stuff like that. But this guy, I forgot his name. So he's running for Senate, and wouldn't you know it, the incumbent senator gets caught up in a sex scandal, and they send this schmuck who was a black dude who had no chance of beating Obama. They send him over there as like a patsy to make it appear as though, and my understanding is he was paid quite well for that. And then he, of course, loses, and then Obama, next thing you know, 84, he's giving the speech at the convention. Nobody's ever heard of him, and he meteoric rise to fame. The whole thing stinks of high heaven, especially the part where his Senate, guy that he was running against suddenly gets involved in a sex scandal and has to drop out.
And somebody uncovered those documents. I think it related to his divorce, and he was going.
Yes.
It wasn't even that bad. He was going to like sex clubs with his ex-wife or something, but they leaked those somehow somebody obtained like the secret divorce papers and
somebody obtained them. Huh?
So he had friends in high places helping him.
Yeah, so it's just the whole Obama thing stinks of high heaven. Well, you know, I've got it around here somewhere. Andrew Craig wrote a book called Presidential. I got it right here. Presidential Puppetry, right? Obama, Romney, and Their Masters by Andrew Craig, where he asserts that a whole bunch of these people were simply, controlled by the CIA, that a lot of this presidential politics are in fact puppetry, and that the CIA's hand is all over that stuff. What are your thoughts on there before you go? That's what you do. Covert, again, covertactionmagazine.com is where you guys want to go for his stuff. That's what you do. What do you think about the assertions made by Craig, notwithstanding that, but he's saying they got their hand in the White House all over the place in how people get there, who gets there, etc.
I think that's absolutely true. I've done a study on Bill Clinton. In the 92 election, you had two candidates who were very blatantly, controlled by the CIA or part of the CIA. George, H.W. Bush, who was a former CIA director, and goes back to the Bay of Pigs. And then you had Bill Clinton, who was, according to Cordmeyer Jr., Clinton was recruited by the CIA when he was a student at Oxford with Strobe Talbot, his roommate, who was CIA, and they were sent on a mission to Russia to smuggle the memoirs of Nikita Khrushchev, which was a coup for the CIA in the Cold War because he had denounced Stalin. And Meyer said, who do you think funded Clinton and Talbot to go to Russia? And then when Clinton was the governor of Arkansas, he oversaw a major CIA operation to smuggle arms to the Nicaraguan Contras out of Mena, Arkansas, in the western part of the state. Then they brought back drugs, and Clinton's friends who owned the banks in Arkansas laundered a lot of the money, and Hillary Clinton of the Rose Law Firm with their lawyer. So Clinton was all tied with the CIA. So that election is a good example. You have both two major candidates, and then they smeared Ross Perot with the outsider, and he was starting to say, kind of mock the system, and his views were resonating with a lot of Americans, so they used the dirty tricks to undermine him. So that election is a good example. Obama's career is a good example. And I mean, Biden has covered up for the CIA. If you look at his background, including in the 80s, he was in the Senate on the Senate Judiciary Committee. There was the theft of the PROMIS software. A guy named Bill Hamilton developed this computer software that was going to be used like for law enforcement agencies and law firms to better track legal cases and set up online databases. But the CIA saw they had a good use for the software and it could help them infiltrate banks and launder money through banks. So they stole it. They stole Hamilton's companies, and it was a fraud. And Hamilton was there was some congressman he was working with, a guy named Jack Brooks, took up an investigation in the the House Judiciary Committee, and then it went to Biden's committee. Basically, helped block this investigation, and Biden did all kinds of dirty things to help cover up for this CIA theft of the Proma software. So that's just an example of how Biden has protected the CIA, and he made some kind of bargain with them. And Biden's mentor was Averell Harriman, who was the son of a robber baron who was a dominant figure in U.S. foreign policy in the 1940s through the 1960s. And he was very tied with the CIA and the Dulles brothers and others.
And the Bushes.
And the
Bushes.
Exactly.
In fact, isn't he either him or his dad? Wasn't he the one who had a bank with Prescott Bush that was financing the Nazis?
Yes, that was him yeah, absolutely. So he was and he set up this Institute for Soviet Studies at Columbia, the Harriman Institute, and they promote this anti-Russia worldview, and that's CIA infiltrates everywhere, academia. And that's an example. And also, I did a study as Congress. They've infiltrate the White House as well as Congress. They're now overtly many CIA operatives in the Democratic Party in Congress. One is Abigail Spanberger, and now she's running for governor of Virginia. She is a CIA agent, and she served 3 terms in Congress. And of course, she attacked when they nominated Tulsi Gabbard. She was the first one to come out and say she's a conspiracy theorist and she's going to undermine national security. But there are at least 5 or 6 CIA operatives in the Democratic Party in Congress. The Senate Intelligence Committee, like I was doing an article this week that should be published next week or the following week, on the Senate Intelligence Committee. It was set up after the Church Committee hearing as a watchdog of the CIA, but they've got all these, neoconservatives and pro-CIA. Well, there are actually 2 people I found, one on the board of directors of the National Endowment for Democracy, Don Young, a senator from Indiana. He's on the Senate Intelligence Committee, yet he's on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a CIA front. So, the American government was set up with separation of powers and checks and balances, and that's been destroyed. And the CIA has destroyed that by infiltrating Congress, by infiltrating the White House, and Americans shouldn't tolerate it. It is the destruction of democracy. And the CIA is pushing this authoritarianism to bring it back to what you were discussing about censorship. They're at the forefront of that. And figure like Avril Hain were a key figure in warning about Russian disinformation and in pushing for censorship. So the public should push back because this is a cancer on American democracy, and it's against what the founding fathers wanted the country to be. Is not what it is today.
Do you, last question, I know, but this is fun, last question. When the Butler, Pennsylvania shot against Trump and the other guy, the Ukraine guy whose wife was mysteriously connected to some CIA front, were you suspicious about either of those as intelligence operations?
The Trump assassination
attempts, yeah, either the one in Butler, Pennsylvania.
Oh, with Ryan Ralph. Oh, yes.
Go ahead. Ryan Ralph, particularly, whose wife was connected to this CIA front. Your thought? Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely suspicious. And with the Ryan Ralph, I did an article on that on my Substack. I analyzed. He actually wrote a book, and I read the book. And to me, I read a lot of this, enough of this stuff to smell, CIA. It's not it didn't read like a genuine book. It was a series of ramblings, and then he would put in like a CIA talking point. Like he wasn't even discussing Ukraine. And it masqueraded as this kind of like hippie do-gooder that he wants peace in the world. And then he inserts a line: Zelensky had to delay the election because he faced all these threats. And he wasn't even discussing Zelensky. It was like this flowery, like kind of hippie stuff. And then you have this line, Zelensky had to delay the election. And then you have this line in another chapter where he's discussing totally different. Lena Boulard is a great leader. That's the leader in Peru who the CIA put in, who's on charge of genocide and has like a 3% popularity rating. What is he throwing that in? That she's a great leader? And he's never even discussing her. He doesn't go in any depth. So to me, it was just like a CIA disinformation. And this guy had been actually recruiting mercenaries in Ukraine. And then what's he doing? He's trying to assassinate Trump, but he was getting nowhere near Trump. I think it's part of a strategy of tension. The CIA just wants like to put the public on edge, so they stage these kind of attacks, and the people will be on edge and not think rationally and support for more police state measures. This growing authoritarianism, they're actually going to sanction it because they think there are these crazy people out there. But the CIA is known to cultivate Manchurian candidates and to use like hypnosis and kind of brainwashing techniques. And they tell them what to do and where to go, and they set them up for something. And with regard to the first Trump assassination, yeah, many are suspicious because how is this guy sitting on the roof for all that time? Nobody stopped him. And then, it looked like there are 3 shots. I think investigators found there were 3 shots. So there and shots coming from different directions. So he couldn't have been the lone shooter. And then it all looks staged. I mean, that they, Trump with the ear, and then they have the flag come out. And it seemed like maybe an effort to try and legitimize Trump after he was beat down in the media all these years, to kind of rehabilitate his image that he's a nicer Trump. And look, he survived these attacks. And so we can accept him as our president. And he's going to now pick up where Biden left off with these horrible policy that served the power elite.
Well, interesting stuff here, man. Interesting stuff. I always enjoy talking to you, and hopefully, if you're free next week, we can get back. And once Trump gets in, we'll look at the directions things are going on. And there's always plenty to talk about because I would like to talk to you at some point of your thoughts on COVID. I don't know if you saw my Substack. I did an article. I did an investigation, and I personally came to the conclusion that it came out of Fort Detrick. That was my conclusion. That it was out of Fort Detrick.
I'm going to read that. Yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah. Well, Fort Detrick shut down just before, like in June, there was all of these articles where Fort Detrick closed because they had an incident there. And then next thing you know, like an hour's drive away at 2 senior citizen homes, they got hit with some strange flu where a bunch of people died. Just an hour away from there. It's like, well, that's kind of weird. And then what do you know? A mysterious vaping disease popped up. Yeah, mysterious vaping disease. And the same mysterious vaping disease that as soon as COVID showed up, there was no more mysterious vaping disease. When you start putting those things together, I'll send you that. It like when you look at the timeline, it becomes blatantly obvious what happened. I'll send it to you. At any rate, thanks a lot, everybody.
Yeah, because I read Robert Kennedy's book, The Wuhan Cover-Up, and he shows that historical connection between the biowarfare program, the Cold War, and the gain-of-function research. So he made a pretty strong case in that book. So, yeah, I'm going to read your article, and, I'll be happy to come back and discuss that and other topics.
Sounds like a winner. All right, thanks a lot, everybody. Don't forget, you guys, go to Covert Action magazine. In fact, let me show it to you. I want everybody to see it so you won't have to guess. This is important because this is a great I like to do that. There you go. CovertActionMagazine.com, exposing covert action since 1978. And look at that. They got a YouTube channel. All kinds of things going on. Look at this. They worked on the 9/11 terrorist attack, Israel, Gaza, political assassinations, prison industrial complex, war in Ukraine. So there's a whole lot to talk about. Have you done much work on presidential assassinations over the course of history?
Yes, actually, I'm developing a book called Assassination as American as Apple Pie, and it challenges the myth of the lone nut and the myth of American exceptionalism that, we're this model democracy, we're power always transitions peacefully. In fact, there are repeated conspiracies throughout history in the United States, like in other countries. So, yeah, and I did a series for Covert Action on assassinations, and not just presidents, but also like the nation's first defense secretary after World War II, James Forrestal, was assassinated, and other high level.
What was the guy in Louisiana that got shot? The
politician. Huey Long. Yeah,
Long?
I've studied that. Huey Long was a real populist. He was a great man, a great leader out of the state of Louisiana, who had a share the wealth campaign. And you can't have that. He was challenging Roosevelt from the left in the 1936 election, and then he got assassinated. And he was really standing up for the poor and working people, and they loved him. They still love him in Louisiana. I've spent some time there. And he's the kind of leader we need, a real firebrand. And he was getting things done as the governor of Louisiana, passing a lot of progressive legislation, on behalf of working people. And that's what happened to him.
Yeah, exactly. So the assassinations are everywhere. Yeah, we could go. Yeah. Well, good. We need to do a show on that.
Okay,
political assassinations. Let's do that next. I'll get with you. I'll send you the article I did on the origins of COVID. Okay, so great. Okay. Next week we'll talk. We'll do something on political assassinations. Jeremy Kuzmarov. Am I pronouncing your name wrong?
No, well, it's Jeremy, but I think you may have said Jerry, but Jeremy Kuzmarov. Yeah.
Kuzmarov. Okay, great, perfect. All right, thanks a lot, everybody. It is critical that you go to covertactionmagazine.com. It's also important, if you can afford it, that you support this channel and you like it, you subscribe. Apparently, not a lot of people are doing that according to YouTube, but according to the people, they are. Additionally, it's critical that you share this and some of the other great videos on all your social media platforms. Thanks a lot. We'll have Jeremy back soon, and what a great video. We're out.